Hi again. When we last finished, we were just talking about the business judgment rule. And the reason that the business judgment rule is so important is that it protects officers and directors from what are essentially decisions that turned out wrong, right? How many times have we made decisions that we thought were in the best of intentions for ourselves or for someone else, but the decision just turned out not to be the right one? And that's what we're talking about with the business judgment rule. We're talking about the directors being faced with a decision, and the directors do everything right in the making of the decision. For example, in a decision to close a factory, what kind of information goes into that decision making? Should the board of directors just get together and say, yeah, this seems like a good idea, let's do it? No, the board of directors has to do what we call the due diligence. Let's research what the closing of the factory will do. Will it save us money? How will it impact the business? If so, how? I mean, this could also be said for, let's say, opening a new location. Let's turn it to something more positive. Maybe my business is growing and we're considering opening a location. Maybe I have a bakery in Bedford and we're thinking about opening another location in Lowell. And that's a good decision. But we can't just wake up one morning as a director and say, yeah, let's open a new location. We have to take into a lot of information. For example, what's the right timing for opening this new location? Where exactly should we open the new location? If we're thinking about Lowell, should we look at other cities? How much money should we spend on opening the location? What size space should we have? So the board of directors has to make decisions with that fiduciary duty in mind, with that duty of loyalty and that duty of care that we've been describing for the last 2 weeks, to not make rash decisions, but make well thought out decisions. And when a director makes a decision with that good faith and no conflict of interest and in the best interest of the corporation, even if that decision turns sour or external events happen and it ends up being bad for the corporation, the director themselves, they are protected by this business judgment rule that says, listen, directors, we know that sometimes decisions turn out badly. So it's not limited liability, but it's a way to shield them from director liability. So I do want you to take a minute and take a look at the chart on page 34. I think it's actually called chart 34.1 in your book, that describes how directors can make decisions and keep themselves protected using it's like a nice flow chart. So I want you to take a look at it. And I just want to echo why it is that courts adopt a business judgment rule and why it is such an important piece to being a director. Again, as I mentioned at the end of the last slide, could you imagine if you thought you were going to get sued if you're a director and a business decision went sour, if something didn't work out right? You would never want to be a director. So the business judgment rule accomplishes 3 important tasks. It encourages individuals to serve as directors. We want people to be involved in corporate management. It also allows the directors to do the job without having to worry about this liability hanging over their heads all the time. Again, that would not be good for running a company. And third, but equally as important, is that it keeps courts out of corporate management. Believe it or not, courts do not want to resolve every corporate dispute and be in the business of second-guessing directors. That's not something the courts want to do. So by having this rule in place, it gives courts a more hands-off approach. So just to give you one example, so there was a case many years ago involving Wrigley Field. If you're not familiar with Wrigley Field, it is a baseball stadium in Chicago. And many years ago, I believe it was in the 1960s, maybe even earlier than that, Wrigley Field did not have lights in the stadium. And the reason they did not have the overhead lights is because the directors didn't think that they didn't want to have night games, because they were worried that night games would lead to fans becoming drunken and going out into the neighborhoods, and it just wasn't what they wanted to do. They wanted to keep all the games daytime. But the shareholders were not happy, and so they sued, and they said, that's not a good decision. That's not a good business decision. We want lights, we want night games because we want business and we want more people to come, and we think that's the right business decision. So it was an example of a fiduciary duty issue. And it's a really good example of corporate management was shielded from its decision making. In fact, the corporate management won because the court agreed that there was something called a rational business decision behind the decision to not put overhead lights in Wrigley Field, the baseball stadium. It wasn't that the court decided this was the right decision or this was the wrong decision. That's not really the court's rule, but the court's role, I should say. But the way the business judgment rule works goes like this. Did the officers and directors act as fiduciaries? Did they act in good faith? Did they act with a duty of loyalty and a duty of care and in the best interest of the corporation? And did they act with a rational business purpose? And if that is all true, even if the shareholders are unhappy, even if the corporation loses money, the officers and directors are not liable for those losses. So that's why this rule is really important and why I wanted to take a few extra minutes to finish it on this PowerPoint. I hope that helps make sense. I look forward to talking about this with our ethics conversation on the discussion board.